The city was in chaos, the streets filled with people rushing to and fro, their faces filled with worry and fear. Rostova and Ben stood out from the crowd, their movements swift and purposeful. They had a mission, a plan to prevent a disaster that would change the course of human history. "We need to move fast," Rostova said, her voice low and urgent. "The clock is ticking and every minute counts." "I know," Ben replied, his eyes scanning the surrounding area. "I can see it, the threads of possibility weaving together, forming a tapestry of chaos and destruction." Rostova glanced at him, her analytical mind working overtime to process the information Ben's visions provided. She trusted him, trusted his instincts, and together they made a formidable team. Their first stop was the old clock tower, a landmark in the city that held a secret. Rostova led the way, her long legs eating up the distance as they sprinted through the crowds. Ben followed close behind, his senses on high alert, his visions guiding him through the maze of streets and alleyways. As they reached the clock tower, Rostova slowed down, her eyes scanning the area. The entrance was an old door, hidden behind a waterfall of vines and creepers. Ben pushed it open, and they slipped inside, finding themselves in a narrow corridor that wound its way up to the top of the tower. The air was musty and filled with dust, the only sound the creaking of the old wooden stairs. Rostova took the lead, her footsteps light and quiet as they climbed higher and higher. Ben followed, his heart pounding in his chest, his visions growing stronger with each step. At the top of the tower, they found a room filled with old machinery and gears. Rostova's eyes scanned the area, her mind working to understand the purpose of the equipment. Ben stood beside her, his visions guiding him as he reached out to touch a large crystal nestled in the heart of the machinery. "It's here," he said, his voice filled with excitement. "The key to preventing the disaster, it's here." Rostova turned to him, a look of determination on her face. "Then let's get to work," she said. "We have a lot to do and not much time to do it in." Ben nodded, his eyes locked on the crystal. Together they set to work, their movements swift and precise as they worked to unlock the secrets of the machinery. The clock was ticking, but they were ready, their trust in each other growing with each passing minute. As they worked, the city outside continued to spiral out of control. People rushed to and fro, their faces filled with fear and panic. But Rostova and Ben remained focused, their determination to prevent the disaster driving them forward. "We're running out of time," Rostova said, her voice low and urgent. "We need to move faster." "I know," Ben replied, his eyes locked on the crystal. "I can see it, the threads of possibility weaving together, forming a tapestry of chaos and destruction." Rostova glanced at him, her analytical mind working overtime to process the information Ben's visions provided. They were getting close, she could feel it, the solution to the puzzle that would prevent the disaster. "Let's keep moving," she said, her voice filled with determination. "We're not going to let this happen, not if we can help it." Ben nodded, his eyes locked on the crystal. Together they worked on, their movements swift and precise, their trust in each other growing with each passing minute. The clock was ticking, but they were ready, their determination to save the day driving them forward. They worked tirelessly, their fingers moving in perfect sync as they manipulated the machinery. Rostova's analytical mind guided their decisions, while Ben's visions provided crucial insight. The air was thick with tension, the only sound the whirring of gears and the creaking of old wooden beams. "We're close," Ben said, his voice filled with excitement. "I can see it, the threads of possibility weaving together, forming a new tapestry." Rostova glanced at him, her eyes locked on his. "What do you see?" she asked, her voice low and urgent. "A way out," Ben replied, his eyes sparkling with hope. "A way to prevent the disaster and change the course of history." Rostova's face set in a determined expression. "Then let's do it," she said. "Let's make it happen." Together they made a final adjustment to the machinery, their movements swift and precise. The room was filled with a blinding light, and the air seemed to vibrate with energy. Rostova and Ben stood back, their eyes locked on the crystal as it began to glow with an intense, pulsating light. "It's working," Ben said, his voice filled with excitement. "We're doing it." Rostova nodded, her face set in a determined expression. "We're not out of here yet," she said. "We need to get out of the city to a safe distance." Ben nodded, his eyes locked on the crystal. "I can see it, the threads of possibility weaving together, forming a new reality." Rostova turned to him, her analytical mind working overtime to process the information. "What do you see?" she asked, her voice low and urgent. "A new future," Ben replied, his eyes sparkling with hope. "A future where the disaster never happened, where humanity was given a second chance." Rostova's face set in a determined expression. "Then let's make it happen," she said. Let's get out of here and make sure that future becomes a reality. They turned to leave, but as they reached the door, they heard a loud rumbling sound. The ground began to shake, and the air was filled with the sound of crumbling stone. Rostova and Ben exchanged a worried glance, their hearts pounding in their chests. "What's happening?" Rostova asked, her voice low and urgent. Ben's eyes were locked on the crystal, his visions guiding him. "The disaster," he said, his voice filled with fear. "It's happening despite our best efforts." Rostova's face set in a determined expression. "We can't give up," she said. "We have to keep trying to find a way to stop it." Ben nodded, his eyes locked on the crystal. "I can see it, the threads of possibility weaving together, forming a new tapestry. There's still a chance, still a way to prevent the disaster." Rostova's eyes locked on his, her analytical mind working overtime to process the information. "Then let's do it," she said. "Let's find a way to stop the disaster and change the course of history." Together they turned to face the challenge ahead, their determination to save the day driving them forward. The clock was ticking, but they were ready, their trust in each other growing with each passing minute. They were a team that would stop at nothing to prevent the disaster and create a new future. The machinery was complex, but Rostova's analytical mind was well equipped to handle it. She worked quickly, her fingers flying over the gears and levers as she tried to understand the purpose of each component. Ben stood beside her, his visions guiding him as he reached out to touch the crystal. "I think I see," he said, his voice filled with excitement. "The crystal is the key to unlocking the machinery, but we need to activate it in a specific sequence." Rostova turned to him, her eyes locked on his. "What sequence?" she asked. Ben closed his eyes, his mind focusing on the visions. "I see a pattern," he said, "a series of numbers and symbols that need to be entered in a specific order." Rostova nodded, her mind racing. She quickly grabbed a piece of paper and began to scribble down the sequence. As she worked, the machinery around them began to hum, the gears and levers moving into place. "It's working," Ben said, his eyes snapping open. "The crystal is activating and the machinery is responding." Rostova smiled, a look of determination on her face. "We're getting close," she said. "Let's keep moving." Together they worked on, their movements swift and precise. The machinery was complex, but with Ben's visions guiding them, they were able to navigate its intricate mechanisms. As they worked, the city outside continued to spiral out of control, but Rostova and Ben remained focused, their determination to prevent the disaster driving them forward. Finally, after what seemed like hours of work, the machinery was activated. The crystal pulsed with energy and the gears and levers moved into place. Rostova and Ben stood back, their eyes locked on the machinery as it hummed to life. "We did it," Rostova said, her voice filled with excitement. "We activated the machinery." Ben nodded, his eyes locked on the crystal. "But we're not out of the woods yet," he said. "The disaster is still looming and we need to make sure that the machinery is working as intended." Rostova nodded, her analytical mind already working on the next step. "We need to monitor the machinery," she said. "Make sure it's working correctly and that the disaster is being prevented." Ben nodded, his eyes scanning the area. "I'll keep an eye on the visions," he said. "If anything changes, I'll let you know." Rostova smiled, a look of determination on her face. Together they waited, their eyes locked on the machinery as it hummed to life. The clock was still ticking, but they were ready, their trust in each other and their determination to save the day driving them forward. As they waited, the city outside began to slow down. The people rushing to and fro began to stop, their faces filled with a mix of confusion and hope. Rostova and Ben stood watch, their eyes locked on the machinery as it continued to hum. "It's working," Ben said, his voice filled with excitement. "The visions are changing, the threads of possibility weaving together in a new pattern." Rostova smiled, a look of relief on her face. "We did it," she said. "We prevented the disaster." But as they stood there, basking in the glow of their success, a new challenge emerged. The machinery, now activated, was beginning to reveal a new secret, one that would change the course of human history forever. "What's happening?" Ben said, his voice filled with concern. "The visions are changing, revealing a new truth." Rostova turned to him, her eyes locked on his. "What is it?" she asked. Ben's eyes were wide with wonder. "I see a new path," he said, "a path that leads to a new future, one filled with possibility and danger." Rostova's eyes narrowed, her analytical mind working overtime to process the information. "What does it mean?" she asked. Ben's eyes locked on hers. "It means that our work is far from over," he said. "We've prevented one disaster, but a new challenge is emerging, one that will require all our skills and determination to overcome. The machinery was complex, a web of gears and levers that seemed to defy logic. But Rostova's analytical mind was up to the task, and with Ben's visions guiding her, they slowly began to unlock the secrets of the equipment. As they worked, the air around them seemed to grow thick with tension. The clock was ticking and the city outside was spiraling out of control. But Rostova and Ben remained focused, their determination to prevent the disaster driving them forward. "We're close," Ben said, his eyes locked on the crystal. "I can see it, the threads of possibility weaving together, forming a tapestry of chaos and destruction." Rostova glanced at him, her mind racing with the implications. They were running out of time, and the solution to the puzzle was still elusive. "Let's keep moving," she said, her voice filled with determination. "We're not going to let this happen, not if we can help it." Ben nodded, his eyes locked on the crystal. Together they worked on, their movements swift and precise. The clock was ticking, but they were ready, their trust in each other growing with each passing minute. Suddenly, the machinery lurched to life, the gears whirring as the crystal began to glow. Rostova and Ben exchanged a look, their hearts pounding in their chests. "It's working," Ben said, his voice filled with excitement. "We're actually doing it." Rostova nodded, her eyes locked on the crystal. The threads of possibility were beginning to unravel, the tapestry of chaos and destruction slowly coming apart. The clock struck midnight, the sound echoing through the city like a death knell. But Rostova and Ben didn't flinch, their determination to prevent the disaster driving them forward. And then, in an instant, it was over. The machinery fell silent, the crystal ceased to glow, and the city outside began to return to normal. The people in the streets began to calm down, their faces filled with relief and gratitude. Rostova and Ben stood back, their chests heaving with exhaustion. They had done it, they had prevented the disaster and saved the city. "We make a good team," Ben said, his eyes locked on Rostova. Rostova smiled, her eyes shining with pride. "We certainly do," she said. As they stood there, basking in the glow of their victory, a faint hum began to build in the distance. It was a low, menacing sound like the growl of a predator. Rostova's eyes narrowed, her mind racing with the implications. "What is that?" she said. Ben's eyes locked on the horizon, his visions guiding him. "I don't know," he said, "but I think it's just the beginning." The hum grew louder, the sound building to a crescendo. Rostova and Ben exchanged a look, their hearts pounding in their chests. They had saved the city, but a new threat was emerging, one that would require all their skills and determination to overcome. They stood ready, their trust in each other growing with each passing minute. The adventure was far from over, and Rostova and Ben were ready to face whatever came next.